In a dark, forgotten storage room in Egypt, an archaeologist brushes dust off a metal plate. It's dated to 1500 BC. But as the etching becomes clear, he freezes. It's a map of the world, and get this, it clearly shows the coastline of Antarctica, a continent supposedly hidden under ice for millions of years.
We're talking about maps that were drawn roughly between the 1300s and the 1700s.
This single artifact, older than King Tut, is now threatening to upend everything we know about human history. Experts are scrambling for answers, and they are coming up empty. The artifact that shouldn't exist. The story of this impossible artifact begins not in a grand, gold-filled tomb, but in the suffocating dust of a storage depot. Deep within the sprawling Karnak temple complex in Luxor, there are rooms that haven't been properly cataloged in over a century. Everyone's obsessed with the big finds, the golden masks, the towering statues, the undisturbed tombs. But here's the catch: the real secrets are often buried in the junk. Crate after crate, stacked 20 feet high, are filled with what are politely called miscellaneous objects. These are the items from early chaotic excavations in the 1800s. We're talking broken pottery, corroded tools, fragments of statues, and countless religious offerings. Basically, it's the stuff that wasn't shiny enough for a museum display. In 2023, a joint team from the University of Berlin and the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities began the painstaking task of finally cataloging this mess. Dr. Aris Thorn, a German archaeologist known for his meticulous, boring work on Bronze Age trade routes, was leading the project. He was not expecting to rewrite human history. He was expecting to spend 6 months counting broken pots. 3 months into the project, his team was working on a section of crates from an 1898 French excavation. One crate, marked K27 miscellaneous bronzes, was rotted through. As they carefully lifted the contents, they found the usual: small, green-crusted statues of Osiris, bent ceremonial knives, and dozens of offering plates. But one object tucked in the very bottom felt wrong. It was a dark metallic disc just under 11 inches across. It was heavy, and it wasn't the dull green of oxidized bronze. It was a deep, unsettling black with almost no corrosion. It looked more like modern coated metal than something from the ancient world. Dr. Thorne's first thought was that it was a hoax, or maybe a piece of old excavation equipment that fell into the crate. But it was covered in a hardened layer of Nile clay, and pressed into that clay was the cartouche of Pharaoh Thutmose III that places it squarely in the New Kingdom right around 1500 BC. So here's the deal. They took the discs to their field lab. The first mystery, they couldn't figure out what it was made of. Standard X-ray fluorescence tests came back with a mess of readings. It seemed to be a bronze alloy, but it also contained traces of tungsten, iridium, and other metals that the Egyptians had absolutely no way of high-temp forging. It was an impossible alloy. The second mystery? It was warm. Not hot, just a few degrees warmer than the ambient air in the room. Always, they logged it as anomalous ritual disk and set it aside for cleaning, and that's when the real bombshell dropped. A young researcher, Dr. Lena Hansen, was tasked with gently removing the caked-on clay. She wasn't using a chisel, she was using a soft bristle brush. But as she cleared the first patch, she saw lines. These weren't scratches. They weren't etched or carved. She put it under a digital microscope, and what she saw made her call Dr. Thorne immediately. The lines were a network of microscopic, hair-thin grooves, arranged in a pattern that was clearly not Egyptian. It looked technological. As they cleaned the entire disk, the pattern emerged. It was a map, but it wasn't a map of Egypt. They could make out the boot of Italy. They saw the coastline of West Africa and even the distinct shape of South America's eastern bulge. This was a world map, and that's putting it lightly because this artifact was already the most important find of the century. A global map from 1500 BC? It was unthinkable. The ancient Egyptians were river sailors. They barely liked the open Mediterranean. They definitely didn't know about South America. But what most people don't realize is that none of that was the truly WTF moment. That came when Dr. Thorne looked at the bottom of the disk. It showed a massive, sprawling southern continent. "It's just Terra Australis," one of the older researchers said, the mythical balancing continent the Greeks always theorized about. But Thorne knew it wasn't. The Terra Australis on old maps is just a big, vague blob. This was different. This was detailed. It had a complex coastline with bays, inlets, and even mountain ranges marked on the interior. It was a real place. On a hunch that changed the world, Dr. Thorne pulled up NASA's most recent subglacial map of Antarctica, the one made by Operation Icebridge using ice-penetrating radar to chart the actual land hidden beneath 2 miles of solid ice. He overlaid the 3D scan of the 1500 BC disk with the NASA radar map. He was expecting a vague similarity. What he got was a 1-to-1 match. It was perfect. The disk showed the exact, true coastline of Antarctica. It showed the trans-Antarctic mountains. It showed the high-ground islands of the Antarctic archipelago. And most chillingly, it showed the Gamburtsev Mountains, a massive Alps-sized mountain range in the center of the continent that is so completely buried in ice, no human even knew it existed until a Russian team flew over it in 1958. The disk even showed rivers flowing from these mountains to the sea. These are the same ancient river channels that modern science has confirmed are carved into the bedrock, hidden under all that ice. The room was silent. They were looking at a satellite-quality, ice-penetrating radar map of an ice-free Antarctica. And it was, according to all the archaeological context, 3,500 years old. The experts were called in, and one by one, they were left speechless. Dr. Elaine Ross, a leading paleogeologist, was the first to object. "This is impossible," she stated flatly. "The Antarctic ice sheet is not a recent phenomenon. It began forming 34 million years ago. It hasn't been ice-free and had rivers in at least 14 million years. That's long before hominids existed. This disk cannot be real." Then came the historian, Dr. Ben Carter. "Let's say the geology is wrong. The Egyptians didn't make this. This isn't their work. This isn't their world. They had no conception of a globe. They didn't have the mathematics, the ships, or the motive. And yet the disk was there. It was real. It was pulled from a sealed, dated context. The Thorne disk, as the media later called it, presented a paradox that science couldn't solve. It was either the most complex, elaborate, and pointless forgery in human history, or it was an authentic artifact that shattered everything we know about our past. How could Bronze Age people, who were just figuring out how to make iron, have a map of a continent that hasn't been seen by a human eye in 14 million years? This artifact proved ancient people knew the true shape of the world. But how? Echoes from a lost world. The discovery of the Thorne disk sent a shockwave through the quiet, polite world of archaeology. And get this, its biggest impact was on other mysteries. Suddenly, a handful of old, debunked maps were pulled out of the crank file and thrown onto the urgent desk. Because the crazy part is, the Thorne disk wasn't the first map to show Antarctica. It was just the best. For decades, these other maps were the passion of a small, dedicated group of researchers and the target of ridicule for the mainstream. The most famous of all is the Piri Reis map. So here's the deal. In 1929, a team was sorting through old junk in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. Sound familiar? They found a fragment of a map painted on a gazelle skin and signed by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis. The date was 1513. The map was a stunner. It showed the western coast of Africa and the eastern coast of South America with an accuracy that just shouldn't have been possible. What most people don't realize is the longitude problem. To map longitude, east-west, you need to know the exact time in 2 different places at once. In the 1500s, they didn't have accurate seafaring clocks. That's why Columbus was so wrong about where he was. The invention of the marine chronometer in the 1700s is what finally solved the globe. Yet here was a map from 1513 that seemed to have the longitudes right. But that wasn't the bombshell. At the bottom of the map, creeping in from the right, was a coastline. This coastline connected to the tip of South America and stretched eastward. Piri Reis himself had written a note on it saying he had copied it from other maps and that the region was unknown. In the 1960s, a historian named Professor Charles Hapgood became obsessed with this. He argued that this unknown coastline was, in fact, the northern coast of Antarctica, specifically Queen Maud Land, and he claimed it was the coast without ice. This was, of course, insane. Antarctica wasn't discovered until 1820. The coastline under the ice wasn't mapped until the 20th century. Hapgood's theory was explosive. He didn't think Piri Reis was a wizard, he just read the admiral's own notes. Piri Reis admitted his map was a compilation. He wrote that he had used over 20 older source maps. Some, he said, were from the time of Alexander the Great. Others, he claimed, were ancient and came from a captured sailor of Christopher Columbus. Hapgood proposed that these source maps were the last surviving fragments of a forgotten global maritime civilization. An advanced civilization from before the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago. He believed these ancient sea kings had mapped the entire globe with incredible precision and that their knowledge was passed down in fragments through places like the Library of Alexandria, until Piri Reis got his hands on the last degraded copies. Yeah, about that mainstream science hated this theory, and that's putting it lightly. They argued the Antarctica on the map is just the southern coast of South America, probably Patagonia, just bent eastward to fit on the parchment. They pointed to other notes from Piri Reis, which described the region as being very hot and home to large snakes. That sounds a lot more like the Amazon than the South Pole. For most historians, the Piri Reis map was a fascinating but flawed piece of early map-making, not a snapshot from a lost civilization, but Hapgood's supporters held firm. They argued the snakes and heat were just Piri Reis guessing to fill in the blanks. The coastline itself, they said, was the real secret, and the Piri Reis map wasn't alone. Hapgood's maps of the ancient sea kings pointed to another, even stranger artifact, the Orontius Phineus map of 1531. This map is a beautiful heart-shaped projection of the world, and right at the bottom it shows a massive continent labeled Terra Australis. At first it looks like pure fantasy, but Hapgood, using his controversial projection methods, argued that this too was a map of an ice-free Antarctica, his proof. The map was covered in rivers. Orontius Phineus had drawn large, detailed rivers flowing from the center of this landmass to the sea. Hapgood pointed out that these rivers almost perfectly matched the known subglacial channels of the Bird and Scott glaciers, which we only discovered with modern radar. How could a French mathematician in the 1500s possibly know about rivers under 2 miles of ice? Unless, of course, he was copying a much, much older source map. Again, the debunkers came out. They argued Orontius Phineus was just following the ancient Greek idea of a balancing continent. They assumed a giant landmass. For 60 years, the debate has been stuck there, a stalemate. The maps are weird, the theories are wild, but there's no smoking gun. The Thorn Disk is that smoking gun. It's not a paper copy from the 1500s, it's a solid metal artifact from 1500 BC. It's not a fragmented coastline. It's the whole continent. It's not vague or a lucky guess. It's a 1-to-1 satellite perfect match for the subglacial landmass. The Thorn Disk single-handedly proves that Hapgood's source maps were real. It is one of those ancient maps. In fact, it's probably the source that the maps from Alexander's time were copied from. It proves that knowledge of Antarctica's true ice-free shape existed in the Bronze Age. But this just deepens the paradox. Because if the map is real, the science of the ice must be wrong, and that science is written in the ice itself. The maps were one thing, but what about the ice itself? Science has an answer, and it's a big one. The pole shift. So here's the deal. We have the maps, the Piri Reis, the Orontius Phineus, and now the Thorn Disk, all showing a version of Antarctica without ice. But science has a different story. It's not a theory, it's not a map. It's a direct physical record drilled from the deepest parts of the ice sheet. We're talking about ice cores. This is the wow factor that stops all these map theories in their tracks. At Vostok Station, a Russian research base in the middle of nowhere, scientists have drilled down 2.3 miles into the ice. They pulled up a core, a long tube of ice, that is a perfect frozen timeline of Earth's climate. Each layer in that core is 1 year's snowfall, and trapped in that snowfall are tiny microscopic bubbles of the ancient atmosphere. We can analyze that air. We can see the temperature, the carbon dioxide levels, the volcanic ash. It's a history book that cannot lie. And what most people don't realize is what that history book says. That ice core from Vostok gives us a perfect continuous climate record for the last 420,000 years. Other cores, like the Epica core, go back 800,000 years. And the verdict? It's always been frozen. For the last 800,000 years, Antarctica has been a frozen, lifeless wasteland, buried under miles of ice. It has never, not for one moment, been ice-free. Geologists are even more certain. They say the ice sheet began to form 34 million years ago. They say the continent has been completely frozen as we see it today for at least 14 million years. 14 million years! Humans, Homo sapiens, have only been around for about 300,000 years. Our earliest ape-like ancestors, hominids, only go back 6 or 7 million years. 14 million years ago, there was nothing on this planet that could be called human. So, we have a paradox. It's the biggest paradox in history. On one hand, we have the Thorn Disk, a physical, datable artifact from 1500 BC that undeniably shows Antarctica without ice. On the other hand, we have physical, datable ice cores that undeniably show Antarctica has always had ice. Both of these things cannot be true. This is why experts are speechless. It's not a simple mistake. It's not a hoax. It's a full-on, science-breaking contradiction. This is where Charles Hapgood comes back in because he knew about the ice. And he had a theory. It was a theory so wild, so explosive, that it got him kicked out of mainstream academia. He called it Earth crust displacement. Yeah, about that. This is not the same as continental drift, which is the slow, inch-by-inch movement of tectonic plates. No, Hapgood's theory was way crazier. He proposed that the entire outer shell, or crust of the Earth, is a single, loose piece like the skin of an orange, and that it can and has slipped all at once. Imagine the Earth is a spinning ball. Now imagine the crust, the part we live on, is a loose shell on top of the molten lava mantle. Hapgood argued that if a massive weight, like a 2-mile thick ice cap at one of the poles, gets off center, it can cause the entire crust to shift. In a matter of days, not millions of years. In this scenario, Antarctica wasn't always at the South Pole. What if? Just 12,000 years ago, Antarctica was in a temperate, comfortable climate. What if it was where, say, Australia is now? It would be ice-free, it would have rivers, it would have people. And then a cataclysm happened. Maybe a comet flew by. The balance was broken. The entire crust shifted. In this model, Antarctica slid from the middle of the planet to the bottom of the world in a few days. The temperate landmass was suddenly at the South Pole. It would have flash frozen in an instant. The rivers, the animals, the civilization, all buried under miles of ice in less than a generation. This sounds like a bad science fiction movie, but Hapgood had a wow factor of his own. The frozen mammoths. In Siberia and Alaska, hundreds of woolly mammoths have been found flash frozen. We're not talking about skeletons, we're talking about perfectly preserved bodies with their skin, hair, and eyeballs intact. Some of them were found standing up. The craziest part? They have undigested buttercups and green grass in their stomachs. Buttercups don't grow in the Arctic. They grow in temperate climates, and for food to be undigested, these animals had to have frozen solid at a temperature of like -100 degrees in a matter of hours. Hapgood argued this was his proof. The crust shifted. Siberia, once a temperate zone, was violently moved to the Arctic, flash G-freezing everything, and at the exact same time, the temperate, ice-free Antarctica was moved to the South Pole, where it was flash frozen and buried. This is the only theory that makes the Thorn Disk, the Piri-Reis map, and the Phineas map possible. It claims the maps are real and the ice is real. The maps are just from before the ice, but a lost civilization is just one theory. The others are even more terrifying. A warning from Cycle 1.0. The Thorn Disk has proven one thing: the maps are real. Someone, somewhere, in the deep past knew the true shape of the Earth. But the question is who? This is where we leave the experts behind because they are speechless. We now have to look at the wild theories that the discovery of this 1500 BC artifact has suddenly made not so wild. The leading theory is the one Charles Hapgood and more recently Graham Hancock have pushed. This is the ghost civilization theory. So here's the deal. We have a confirmed real-world event called the Younger Dryas. It was a period of catastrophic climate change that started around 12,800 years ago. The planet was warming up coming out of the Ice Age. And then wham! Something hit us. The temperature instantly plunged back into a full-blown ice age for over 1,000 years. This event is what caused the flash freezing of the mammoths. Many scientists now believe the trigger was a comet or fragments of a comet striking the North American ice sheet. This theory argues that before this cataclysm during the Ice Age, there was an advanced global maritime civilization. What most people don't realize is that during the Ice Age, so much water was locked up in glaciers that the global sea level was 400 feet lower than it is today. Coastlines were completely different. Florida was twice as wide. Indonesia was one giant landmass. And all of this civilization's coastal cities, their ports, their libraries, are now 400 feet underwater. This ghost civilization was the one that mapped the world. They were the ancient sea kings. And when the comet hit, it triggered the cataclysm. The ice sheets melted, the sea levels rose catastrophically. This was the Great Flood. It wasn't a myth told by Noah or Gilgamesh, it was a memory. This advanced civilization was wiped out, drowned by the rising seas in a matter of days. Their cities were lost. Their world was gone. Only a few survivors made it, scrambling to high ground. They were the gods or wise men who suddenly appeared in places like Egypt, Thoth, Mesopotamia, Oan, and Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl. They were the ones who brought the seeds of civilization, agriculture, astronomy, mathematics, and yes, maps. In this theory, the thorn disk is a legacy artifact. The Egyptians in 1500 BC didn't make it. They inherited it. It was a sacred, impossibly old relic passed down from the gods who had survived the end of the world. Its true meaning was lost, but it was kept as a holy object until it was buried in Karnak. But here's the catch. Even this world-changing theory has a hole. The Younger Dryas was 12,800 years ago. The ice cores say Antarctica was still frozen solid then. This is where Theory B comes in. This is the Atlantean connection. What if this ghost civilization was Atlantis? Plato wrote about Atlantis around 360 BC. He said it was a true story passed down through his family from Egyptian priests. He described a mighty advanced civilization on a large island that perished in a single day and night of misfortune around 9,000 years before his time. 9,000 years before Plato is 11,600 years ago, the exact end of the Younger Dryas. Plato described Atlantis as a high-tech marvel, a city of concentric circles of land and water. He also said it was a maritime empire that ruled over parts of the continent. What if Plato's continent was Antarctica? What if Atlantis was an ice-free Antarctica and the thorn disk is a map of their homeland? This would mean the Earth crust displacement theory is real. Antarctica was temperate, it was Atlantis, and the Younger Dryas cataclysm was the pole shift that slid it to the bottom of the world and flash froze it, the impossible alloy of the thorn disk. Plato described Atlantis as being covered in a mysterious glowing metal they mined called orichalcum. Maybe that's what the disk is made of. But that's not the wildest theory, not even close. Theory C, the extraterrestrial archive. This theory says, forget humans. The map is too good. It's satellite perfect. The lines on the thorn disk under the microscope aren't etched. They are a nanometer scale structure that seems grown. This is technology far beyond anything even we have. So, who has that kind of technology? This theory proposes the map wasn't made by a lost human civilization, but by a visiting non-human one. The gods like Thoth weren't human survivors. They were aliens. They landed. They saw these primitive humans, and they left behind seeds of knowledge to help them advance. The thorn disk isn't a map, it's a test. It's a primer for a galactic database. It's a message left in a material that is almost indestructible, that impossible alloy, that says this is your planet. When you are smart enough to figure out what this map really is, you'll be smart enough to find us. The map is an invitation, a call to the stars, buried in an Egyptian tomb. And that leads to the final, most terrifying theory. Theory D, The warning. This one connects all the dots. The pole shift, the cataclysm, the ghost civilization. What if this isn't a random event? What if this happens on a schedule? There is growing evidence that the Earth's magnetic poles are weakening and that a pole reversal is overdue. What if this is part of a much larger, more violent physical cycle? A cycle of crustal displacement. The civilization from 12,000 years ago, call them Atlanteans, call them Cycle 1.0, they were just as advanced as us. Maybe more advanced. They knew the cataclysm was coming. They knew the crust was going to slip, and they spent their final years trying to leave a warning for the next cycle for us. They built massive, indestructible megalithic structures all over the world, like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey or the pyramids themselves, not as tombs, but as markers, as stone hard drives designed to survive the pole shift and pass on the knowledge. And they made maps. In this theory, the Thorn Disk is not a map of the past. It's not Antarctica before the ice. It's a map of the future. It's a map of what the Earth will look like after the next cataclysm. After our ice caps melt, it's a projection. A warning left for us by the last survivors of a drowned world telling us it's coming again. Get to high ground. With so many theories, what is the truth? The answer is complicated. The truth we can't handle. So here's the deal. After all the wild theories, the impossible alloys, and the mind-bending paradoxes, what are we supposed to believe? A small, dark 11-inch disk found in a dusty crate in Karnak has completely broken our understanding of the past. It's dated to 1500 BC. It shows a perfect satellite-quality map of Antarctica's subglacial landmass. This is the core of the problem. Geologists are speechless because the ice cores are absolute. Antarctica has been a frozen wasteland for 14 million years. Historians are speechless because the people of the Bronze Age were masters of mud bricks and copper chisels, not global mapping and advanced metallurgy. Let's be real. Could this be a hoax? It's the first place every expert goes. Could Dr. Eris Thorne, a boring archaeologist, have faked this? Could he have manufactured an impossible alloy with nanometer-scale grown maps, then somehow faked the 3,500-year-old patina and Nile clay just to, what, get famous? It's a stretch. The resources needed to create the Thorn Disk are probably more advanced than the disk itself implies. It's easier to believe it's real than to believe it's a fake. The Thorn Disk proves our history is a lie, but was it left as a map or as a warning? What do you think? Let us know below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.